Hello, sweeties. So we back at it again with some more crispy. What? I was about to say with some more Krispy Kreme. That's not what we're doing. We are back at it again with some enlisted. Hold on, my cat looks super cute. Oh, adorable. All right. Anyway, yeah, they got this event going on. They got this goofy ass piece right here, the FP45 Liberator. I can't imagine that's very good, but I'm gonna try to get it, I guess, and I guess I'll get the Farquhar, whatever the hell. It sucks you can't like look at these in the thing, cause like I'd love to know what BR the Farquhar is, but I'll check that later. Um, so yeah, we're just going for pretty regular little things here, nothing too crazy. The headshots one would probably be the hardest to get. But we'll see if we get it. Looks like really the only one you gotta try to get is the submachine. Um so let me just double check, make sure I ain't got no upgrades ready. I don't think I do, but I might. We got the Obras ready to level up and I haven't even done it yet. Oh. Yeah. What is 2 and 4? Wonder what the Johnson MG is. Is it BR4? Oh, it is. We could be rolling with the Johnson. I used to hate the Johnson at first, but it's kind of grown on me. I kind of actually quite enjoy it. I wonder if that would be better to use. That would probably put me in BR5 though. So let's relax, I guess. Yeah. We're chilling. We ain't got shit to be upgrading. MG81. I don't even remember looking at this thing. Looks cool though. Yeah, really, we just got Japan to grind, so let's go ahead and hop in. Oh. Okay. I feel like I've got most of those already before, but fuck it, more silver. I won't complain about that. Okay. That's fine. Yeah, look at my ass. I'm not even leveling up. Man, I used to be playing this game. Here I am. Like a scrub. I'm literally a private. I'm rank 1. My rank has evaporated. My god. Alright. Let's go ahead and queue. And then for our easy listening today, we're going to check out a Nate Higgins video, of course. But then before that, I wanted to check one out called Honest Thoughts from a Climate Scientist on What It Means to Exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming target. We're going to check that out real quick.
I wanted to offer my professional and personal reflections on a topic that has
Moscow.
been in the news lately and has also been the subject of much consternation among scientists and policymakers and even the global public at large in recent months. And that topic is the 1.5 degrees centigrade, or about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, global mean temperature target
It's been a while.
set forth in the 2015 Paris Agreement. It has been decidedly a tumultuous decade since that historic global climate conference took place. We've experienced a society-altering global pandemic and rising geopolitical instability that has culminated in intensifying regional conflicts. And remarkably, in the same period, all of Earth's 10 warmest years on record have also occurred. And that's been associated with a spike in record-shattering heat waves and torrential rain events, associated flash floods, and also devastating wildfires in numerous regions, countless regions really, around the world. And heat-trapping greenhouse gas emissions from human sources, which is of course the fundamental cause of global warming in the first place, also reached their record highest levels just last year, in 2024. I realize that's a bit of a heavy introduction, but I think this is a critical moment in which to be reflecting on the broader context of where we are today and where we might be headed, and what that all means really for all of us. As a climate scientist, that's exactly what I'm hoping to offer you in this monologue today. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge that it's absolutely true that every tenth of a degree of warming matters. Each fraction of global warming is going to bring about a larger increase in the adverse societal and ecological impacts than the last. There's simply no doubt about it at this point in time. That statement, though, is not so much about the rate of warming itself, but a reflection of the growing recognition that the Earth system, especially the biosphere, or the living part of the Earth system, and the cryosphere, the frozen part of the Earth system, can respond non-linearly and sometimes even abruptly or irreversibly on human timescales to comparatively gradual shifts in climate. It's also a consequence of hydrological cycle intensification, which actually does scale exponentially, literally exponentially in the mathematical sense, with the level of warming. And so in that setting, we should in fact expect to see an acceleration in the intensity of certain kinds of extreme events, like flash floods or droughts or severe wildfires, so long as the underlying warming rate remains roughly steady. My colleagues and I, in fact, in a recent review paper on increasing hydroclimate volatility, used the analogy of the expanding atmospheric sponge to describe how a warming atmosphere enables rapid and accelerating increases in both extreme dry and extreme wet events at opposite ends of the spectrum, often in the very same locations at different points in time. So in this sense, each fraction of a degree of warming is quite literally worse than the last. That's what makes what we're facing over the next few decades seem quite daunting indeed. I've long been of the view, though, that the 1.5 centigrade warming target was pretty unlikely to have been successful. It was a highly ambitious target from the start, even when it was announced originally, given the climate trends we were seeing at the time and the geopolitical trajectories that were foreseeable moving forward. And I think that it's fair to say that given today's even more challenging geopolitical realities, even 2 degrees centigrade, or about 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, of global mean warming honestly looks like a bit of a long shot in this moment. Though it does remain a geophysical possibility, so it remains physically possible to achieve a significantly less than 2C of warming target, the actual real-world geopolitical and economic plausibility of the very rapid transformation globally that would need to take place if we were going to make that possible seems rather low in this moment in particular. Now, there's certainly, don't get me wrong, certainly nothing wrong with high ambition. In fact, I actually think we could use a lot more of high ambition these days, emphasizing the critical importance of keeping warming to its lowest level possible, and also characterizing, honestly, the progressively more dire consequences of exceeding these important targets like 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade or whatever that might be, does have real value. But I also think we need to be honest about where we're likely headed, on our current path at least, unless there is some dramatic and seemingly implausible realignment, some dramatic intervention in the near term. And that's because our present trajectory is one that brings us to and well past 1.5 degrees centigrade of global mean warming in the next 5 years, continuing forward in time over the next few decades on a path toward 2.5 to 3 degrees centigrade of global mean warming by the end of the 21st century, which is now less than 75 years in the future. We haven't actually reached, by the way, 1.5 degrees centigrade yet, using the multi-year definition set forth by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, which is an important caveat, I think, to understand in this moment of divisive conversations. But it does look like we will be there sooner rather than later, and we are on track to blow right past that warming target, at least where we stand right now. So in other words, our current policy trajectory would still yield essentially a doubling of the observed warming that we've seen so far. But the consequences from that continued warming, from that further doubling, would actually far exceed a doubling of the human and ecological consequences that we've seen with historical warming to date. It is realistic, if we indulge in some optimism about global geopolitical ambition.
What the hell? I didn't drop my grenade. I was spamming that button.
We could still keep warming from greatly exceeding 2 degrees centigrade. That's a realistic possibility if we really get our act together very quickly. But even that comparatively optimistic scenario entails a lot of additional warming beyond where we are right now. There is a real risk, though, I think, in being overly sanguine when it comes to our climate trajectory. If we fail to recognize the dangerous realities that lie ahead on the most likely path, on our current path, then we will not be adequately prepared to confront them head on. And this includes the need to engage in aggressive climate adaptation. In other words, reworking systems and societies to better cope with higher temperatures and rising sea levels and increasing extreme weather events, in addition to rapid climate mitigation, which is to say, working to solve the underlying problem of global warming in the first place. Historically, I think we've focused a little too much on mitigation, and so that in some circles we've actually lost sight of the more imminent need for adaptation in the near term, right now. And that's actively putting lives and economy at risk in this pivotal moment. So we can, and indeed we must, do both adaptation and mitigation as the climate continues to warm. It simply isn't an either-or prospect, and we can't let future climate targets distract from the present-day reality that warming is already having severe and widespread adverse societal and ecological impacts that need to be urgently addressed right now.
All right.
I also think that framing any particular level of warming as a quote-unquote threshold can sometimes be misleading to a general audience, and I prefer the term target, which is in many cases the formal word used, by the way, in much of the IPCC literature, to emphasize that these are ultimately human constructs rather than well-defined or discrete geophysical cliffs that we can fall off of. Now, to be clear, there very likely are some actual geophysical cliffs out there, including so-called tipping points, which is where a system suddenly shifts from one state to another in response to a comparatively incremental push. And the most concerning ones in my mind right now are the ones that exist in the biosphere and the cryosphere. So again, the living the living sector of the Earth system and the frozen sector, it would be very bad, for example, if we tipped the Amazon or other key tropical rainforests into a non-forest state, a grassland or a savanna where there was once dense tropical rainforest, for example, or if the rate of sea level rise were to suddenly accelerate over the course of just a few years or a decade or two due to the collapse of polar ice sheets. Both of these are real examples. These are actual possibilities of things that could happen in the greenhouse, that is the Earth. And there are other similar potential catastrophes lurking out there in the Earth system. Indeed, as the late geochemist Wally Broker often and infamously warned, the climate system is an angry beast, and we are poking at it with sticks. I might add that we are increasingly poking at it with a growing number of increasingly sharp sticks as the decades have passed since that statement was originally made. But the reality is we still don't know exactly how much warming would be required to trigger these more sudden dramatic shifts. It might be 2 degrees centigrade or could be 4 degrees centigrade for some of these tipping points. Yet it could also be 1 degree or 1.5 degrees. And if that's the case, we may have already passed or are getting very close to passing the critical point in these systems without even knowing it yet. Scientific evidence does suggest that the risk of hitting one or more of these tipping points rises significantly between about 1.5 and 2 degrees centigrade of warming above the pre-industrial baseline, in alignment with some of the key Paris Agreement targets. This is part of the reason why these targets are sometimes talked about as thresholds. It's also one reason why I, as both an Earth system scientist and a citizen of the world, am particularly nervous about what might come to pass in the next few decades. Partly, it's that the uncertainty there is not our friend. But the reality is that we just don't know enough about the details here, except to say that the risk of reaching these critical thresholds or tipping points definitely rises with each passing fraction of a degree of warming. And I sincerely hope that we don't find out exactly where those dragons lie through collective personal experience in the decades to come. So, are we feeling lucky? Because we're playing an increasingly high-stakes game of roulette with the global climate, and the odds are decidedly not in our favor. Breaching 1.5 degrees centigrade of warming for a sustained period, as now appears likely to occur later this decade at some point in the 2020s, is an unsettling sign that we haven't yet adequately bent the carbon curve, and also an indication that the best-case scenarios from a decade or so ago are unfortunately probably off the table at this point. Yet it's also not the end of the road, and I really do want to emphasize this point, nor a sign that all hope is lost. Quite the opposite. It's very important also to keep in mind that the very worst case warming scenarios from 10 or 20 years ago are also now off the table. And that represents real progress relative to an even scarier counterfactual future that might have been, but for interventions that we've actually been successful in imposing since that time. We still know what we need to do to halt global warming. It can still be done. It will require a radical scaling up of collective global ambition, and doing so against an increasingly volatile geopolitical backdrop. We should have no illusions. This will be no easy task. And we should not forget that we must also rapidly scale up our climate adaptation capacity in the meantime and in parallel, so as not to leave the most climate-exposed individuals and societies behind. But this too can be done.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Such progress is not inevitable by any means, but it is also far from impossible. So the big question is, moving forward, will we act fast enough to avoid the worst outcomes and avert the most harm as the consequences of climate change accelerate in the coming years and decades? I honestly don't think anybody can answer that question with certainty in this moment, but I sincerely hope that we're up to the challenge.
Yep. Damn. Not smart. Alright, well that was cool. Nothing really new.
Joined by social cognitive
Okay, so this one is the TGS 191 with Nate Hagens.
neuroscientist Taylor Guthrie to discuss how the human brain constructs a sense of self, both individually and
Crap.
in relation.
My little volume booster ain't working. Let me give that
As we're
another
growing
spin.
up, a lot of our motivation is given to us from the outside, telling you what to care about and what your identity should be.
What the hell? It's not working.
What your sense of self should be. And you're now catering a lot of your motivation towards performing this role to get this validation, this recognition, and these signals that I'm doing it right. Whereas
love when things
intrinsic
just
motivation
don't work
is the
without
side where
explanation.
I've actually
It's
done
fucking
a lot of the
awesome.
reflective work of really understanding for myself, like why I'm doing something. What is it about this thing that's really aligned with who I am? And a lot of those things feel effortless. If they were actively enjoying it, if they were passionate about it, they could find the energy, they could find the motivation and continue to engage. Just because it's like, oh yeah, that's me, that's important to me.
Today I'm joined by social cognitive neuroscientist Taylor Guthrie to discuss how the human brain constructs a sense of self, both individually and
Okay, we're
in
chilling.
relationship with others, and how understanding this could support
We're not
meaningful
chilling.
responses to our ecological, psychological, and cultural challenges.
Son of a bitch.
Taylor Guthrie earned his doctorate at the University of Oregon, where his research focused on the default mode network and the neural mechanisms underlying identity, motivation, and social cognition. His current research investigates how
Oh, I missed him.
and value systems
Should have painted him,
interact
bro. I didn't even get an assist. Oh shit, oh fuck, oh
identity,
fuck.
and how modern cultural forces like social media, status seeking,
Okay.
and consumerism hijack this process. Taylor has taught undergraduate and graduate courses in psychology and neuroscience and also creates public-facing content, including The Cellular Republic, a lecture series that demystifies cognitive and social neuroscience. In this episode, Taylor offers a framework for how we can understand the ways in which we create an idea of who we are, and subsequently who we want to be, and how our modern systems get in the way of these ideals. More importantly, having a strong sense of self impacts how we interact and relate to others in groups and communities. By moving beyond the external consumption-driven signals, perhaps we can learn how to better navigate the complex relationships that have long been foundational to human existence long before the carbon pulse. Additionally, if you are enjoying this podcast, I invite you to subscribe to our Substack newsletter where you can read more of the system science underpinning the human predicament. We often increasingly post essays there where my team and I post special announcements related to the Great Simplification. You can find the link to subscribe in the show description. With that, please welcome Taylor Guthrie. Taylor Guthrie, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Nate. I'm excited to be here.
Professor Guthrie, Dr. Guthrie?
A little bit of both. I've done quite a bit of teaching, but yeah, PhD, Dr. G is what my students refer to me as.
Dr. G. I had my students just call me Nate because my dad's a real doctor, so Dr. Hagens makes me squeamish.
I mean, that's with my spouse. It was my spouse's idea. She's like, Dr. Guthrie sounds too dry. Like, liven it up a little bit.
But actually, that dovetails into our conversation today. So you are a social cognitive neuroscientist who studies how the brain constructs identity and a sense of self. So
I guess
I've
I'm too
invited
short.
you today to explore how identity development works, and quelle surprise, why and how that's relevant to the global crises that we face today. So let's start with the core foundations of your work. What is identity from a neuroscience perspective, and why is it important in the world situation that we have today?
Yeah, I think what might be really important at the beginning of the conversation is to suggest to you, for any of the listeners, to really try your best to suspend any preconceived notions that you have around terms like self and identity, because they bring a lot of baggage to the table, historically, philosophically, politically, right? Because what I think we want to do throughout the conversation is try to build these concepts up from what we know about how the brain works, and honestly how the brain reacts to stimuli that have self-relevant kind of nature involved in them.
So, just us talking about self and identity triggers our self and identity to be on alert because we might learn something that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. It's the nature of language. I mean, this is something that we've talked about in philosophy for a while now, the whole structuralist movement and all of these things, that trying to have conversations about any of these things, we're tied up in what the language brings to the table, right? And all of it is tied in these cultural paradigms and kind of religious practices and all of these things that are built around concepts like the self. So people bring a lot to the table when we're trying to think about these things. And what I try to do from kind of a scientific perspective is really try to just look at what the brain is doing when it's reacting to information that has kind of a self-relevant flair to it. Are these things that are describing traits that are that describe me versus other people? Is this me thinking about my own experience versus thinking about other people's experiences? Even things like, is this something that I own versus something that I don't own? Interestingly, something we can kind of circle back to later is this, am I thinking about people that are close to me versus people that are not close to me? All of these different things that have this kind of self-relevant kind of flavor to them have a very similar activation pattern in the brain, especially in a region called the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, kind of the middle of the frontal lobe up here.
This may be an episode that instead of playing at 1.5 speed, people are going to have to slow it down to get all your words. So what is identity, either from a neuroscience perspective or a lay perspective?
Yeah, no, I mean, from the neuroscience perspective, this region in the brain, this is a really robust finding. If we put one person in an MRI scanner, we tell them to think about themselves in some kind of meaningful way, any of these different ways that are described, we're going to get this particular region in their brain to activate.
What does that mean to get a region in the brain to activate? There's more blood flow there, or oxygen, or what does that mean?
So, I mean, you're getting at the nuance of kind of MRI kind of exploration in general. We're looking at blood flow with a lot of these things. And blood flow is something that follows activity because the neurons that just fired now need to be replenished with resources. And so we're following the blood flow back to these regions. And what's really interesting is that it's localized, that the blood flow goes specifically to the neurons that need the nutrients. And I mean, this is really interesting. We found kind of fascinating, reliable, consistent things from kind of these methods. Whenever you're talking about anything in terms of MRI, we're talking about contrast. So we're saying, what is more active when I'm doing this than when I'm doing something else, when I'm not doing something? And what we see is that when we engage people in kind of self-related thought versus other-related thought, we consistently see more activity in a particular region of the brain. And it's kind of the middle of the frontal lobe up here. A lot of people in these kind of social neuroscience circles kind of refer to this as like the self region of the brain. And I don't think I go that far, but I think when you ask, like, what is the identity from a neurological perspective, when you kind of step outside of these studies that are just looking at kind of stimuli that are self-relevant in some way, and you look at things from, like, neuroeconomics, where they're having people do value-based choice, like, am I deciding whether I want this thing or whether I want this thing? We also see a really similar activation profile in this region of the brain, and I think what a lot of the studies are kind of pointing towards is that this region that pops up a lot for self-related stuff seems to be involved in value integration across multiple cognitive streams, right? Is this thing important for me right now versus important for me in the future? What's the context of the environment right now? Is it hot? Is it cold? Do I have the resources to do this thing? Have I been successful in the past? Like, all of these inputs are put together into kind of a holistic picture of kind of what's important to me right now. So value is a big part of the picture, I think, in thinking about self. It's what we lose when we meditate or do psychedelics, this idea of equanimity. You kind of lose a sense of, like, good and bad. And this region does get kind of dysregulated and lose activity in those moments.
You just said that when people meditate or do psychedelics, they have equanimity, and that area in the brain that measures self kind of quiets down.
Yeah. No, this is a pretty kind of consistent result that we've
Oops.
seen in a lot of these
Damn
studies.
it. I am so dumb.
Because something that I'm leading to with a lot of this, so value is a big part of this. These are heavily tied to regions of the brain that are involved in kind of dopamine processes and value kind of type things, especially kind of short-term versus long-term things. But we see, especially this region and some of the other regions that I'll kind of get into that are involved in something called the default mode network, tend to get kind of dysregulated. They tend to be a lot less active when we do things like mushrooms, LSD, when we're in heavy meditation and something, a kind of phenomenon that's described by people from a kind of subjective perspective is this idea of equanimity, of kind of losing a sense of good and bad and pleasant and unpleasant, and kind of just being in the moment, being flooded by kind of the emotional experience or whatever it is. And I think that tracks with what we see from the brain, and it's from kind of a value perspective that we're kind of turning off these top-down models of what I should care about, what I value in this moment.
What does identity mean again? What's the core definition? And then I want to follow up to what you just said.
The value is a big part of this, is that like our brain is constantly engaging in this process of deciding what's important.
Damn,
but
bruh.
that our identity
are
is not
beating
that
our
I
ass
chose to
with
eat
the
the apple
spawns.
right now instead of a bag of Doritos. Identity also has a temporal component to it. It's not that I just value this thing right now, but I continue to value this thing. And I use this model that I have of what's important to me to inform my future progress, to decide what I'm going to value in the future. And that becomes the basis for self-regulation, because now I can use that as an input into the value integration process of saying, you know, I can think 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road towards health, towards all of these things. And now that can be used to kind of override some of these kind of momentary signals that I'm getting of the Dorito bag and the value in this moment.
So are there certain people as a percentage of the population who don't have many values, and therefore they won't look to the behaviors that improve their sense of self 5 years or 10 years from now?
I think that's what a lot of our culture incentivizes, and I think it's going to be a big part of this conversation, because a lot of these processes can be motivated from the outside. We can be kind of told what to value, and a lot of our kind of consumerist kind of cultural ideas are about kind of buying something and doing something right now. You have to think about this as an integrated value signal, and for me to actually engage in self-regulation, I have to have a strong enough kind of authentic idea of who I am and what I want in the future to actually be an input into that kind of integrated value signal.
Damn, this
So
guy is spitting.
It's clear how it applies to the human predicament, the great simplification. If our values are fluid and influenced by media and cultural stories, we can't ground and tether and work towards something that truly has value to us.
But I think that there's another side to that, right? And something that's, I think, really important to consider. There's definitely
How
a
did that guy
negative
get in the
side
roof?
to kind of the way that we can outsource some of this identity to the groups that we're a part of, right? We allow them to tell us what we value. We allow them to kind of design these kind of pre-made selves. I mean, look at all of the influencers on TikTok that just give you this like pre-packaged consumerist self or whatever it is. That's kind of the negative side of this, the side that perpetuates the consumer
There's no windows
cycle
on
that
that
we're
side,
in.
damn it.
It really kind of feeds into we need
Oh.
to buy more, we need to grow more, all of this. But the
Oh.
other side, I think that a lot of the social input to identity is default. I think that's what we started as, was kind of socially identified creatures. And if we're in the right kind of group, in the right kind of environment and context, the group perspective can actually be really beneficial for us as humans. Because this whole process of creating an authentic self and reflecting and doing this work and thinking about who I am and developing these long-term things, it's really hard, it's effortful. And a lot of people don't even have time for it. I mean, I'm in that boat with kids and jobs and all of this. And so we can also kind of lean on these external factors if we're a part of a community that has the kind of values that align with ours or future stuff.
You mentioned authentic
Oh,
self.
he's right
What
there.
does that
Oh,
mean?
there's two of them.
So, I mean, that gets
Oh,
into
baby,
a lot
baby,
of these,
baby.
ideas around kind of self-determination, around
This will be
using
our
your
first
own
pick.
internal signals as feedback rather than these external signals as feedback. Not relying
Why did I
on
get no
likes
points?
and all of the kind of recognition and things that you're getting
All right.
from your social media feeds
do a little bit of
as
this
evidence
now.
that you're being the kind of self that you need to be. right? And a lot of what we do,
Yeah.
I mean, this is something that we do as children. We're given a
Oh!
description of like who we are and
I
what we
paid
need to do
dearly.
and what we need to kind of adhere to. But we,
Oh, I
over
didn't get the
time, start to
engineers.
develop kind
That's
of
unfortunate.
a sense of
I wonder what
we
happened.
like and what we want and where we want to go. And
Artillery.
the more we engage in this kind of externally
fuck?
driven kind of pursuit for self, I think it leads to kind of these hollow views of it, where we're not kind of pursuing things that are aligned with what we truly want.
So how does the brain actually develop an identity over a lifetime? I assume that when you're born and you're a toddler, you don't have an identity. When
Yeah.
does the identity start to exist, and then how important is technology in creating an identity, and how did that identity formation change?
Oh, he
I
killed
mean,
my boy.
You can speculate in our hunter-gatherer times versus today.
The developmental process is fascinating. I mean, I'm watching two little boys grow up right now. It's really interesting, and they go through flavors of identity, kind of precursors to identity that are more tied to kind of independence and autonomy, wanting to do things themselves and kind of practice and try new things, right? And a lot of that happens through childhood, but most of childhood is this very constrained environment. I'm providing them with the rules of how to navigate it safely,
Shit.
what kind of proper etiquette is and politeness is and all of these things. And so I'm very much kind of creating the kind of self that's possible for them. And what we see is that like through childhood, there is this really interesting connectivity pattern that happens in the brain, where the brain becomes really over-connected. Like you have more synapses, like twice as many more synapses as a child than you do as an adult, because you're just kind of over-learning the entire environment. Really seeing like what are people telling me, like what are the rules of all of this. But this really fascinating thing happens during adolescence, and during adolescence, that's when a lot of this identity formation kind of comes to the forefront. And a lot of it is
Damn, that
based
guy's killing
around
it.
taking this really over-connected brain that we have and then pruning it down to really be focused on the things that are kind of authentic, that are going to help me become an effective adult in the world that's not reliant on this kind of dependent nature of my parent-child relationship. And that process right there, you think like there's a huge power, something we can come back to in kind of the adolescent experience. And I think the adolescents of today are really the ones that are going to change the world, because they have a lot of drives towards novelty, towards this kind of pursuit for authenticity, but they're also incredibly vulnerable to kind of the technology side that you mentioned, where if I'm embedded in this culture that's constantly kind of getting me to get my signals about identity and self from these social comparative processes and who's got the most likes and who's got the most whatever, and kind of geared towards buying products, or like I need to be that person that's got all those Lamborghinis or whatever, that is kind of creating a person who thinks that that's what they need going into adulthood. And adolescence is like the most plastic period that we have, and then a lot of that starts to solidify as we get into adulthood. It's a lot harder to change your brain after that fact.
So if someone's identity today is X, what percent of X was kind of created during childhood and teenage years versus as a 40, 50-year-old adult?
I'd say, if I'd put a number, I mean, this is totally speculative, but if I was to put a number to it, I think that a good 70 to 80% is probably adolescence.
Why does this have so much adolescence?
I mean, look at textbooks of development. Like the first 20 years of life is
That's interesting.
3/4 of the book, and then the last like 80 years of your life is like a tiny sliver of the book. It doesn't do justice to the fact that development continues, that we go through these other kind of phases in life as we get older, but it's a different kind of form of identity creation, because our responsibilities change, our values and priorities change, but we're still, I think, building on the foundation of what we built in adolescence, and it's a lot harder to change when we're older.
So you mentioned earlier a term, default mode network, and I've heard that quite a bit this year. Could you define that, and why is it important?
I mean, that's central to the work that I do. It's a network that seems to be really expanded in the human species compared to our ape ancestors. And the brain region that I mentioned earlier that lights up for self-related stuff, it's kind of the middle of the frontal lobe here, is one of the main hubs of this network. And it seems to be a lot of this kind of newer, really cool work that's being done around the default mode network seems to show that it's involved in temporal integration. So what that essentially means is that it's able to keep information online for long periods of time so that we can then integrate that with kind of new incoming information. And so it's essentially building a model of who we are and what we want and allowing us to think about the past, project into the future, and using that as something that can be used for self-regulation, can be used for exploration, values, and all of these kind of things. It's very social in nature. When you look at social neuroscience, almost every social neuroscience study gets default mode activity. Because when the reason it's called default mode is actually a relic of how it was found. Because we were doing these studies where we were having people try to remember something or pay attention to something. And like I mentioned earlier, whenever you do brain science, it's always a contrast. It's like, where is there more activity now than when you're not doing something or when you're doing something else? And there was this really clever researcher, Marcus Rakel, who flipped the script. He said, instead of asking what's more active when I'm paying attention or remembering something, what's more active when I'm not doing anything? And all of a sudden, this network pops up. And so a lot of the early work was looking at how, like, this is just what our brain does when we're not doing anything. And that's where kind of default mode came from. But the more that we've dug into this and the more that we've started to understand the default mode network, it is not a passive network at all. It's the main thing that allows us to engage in mental time travel. It's what takes us out of the present moment and allows us to reflect. It allows us to project into the future.
Oh shit! Oh, that's a friendly. Okay. Oh no, it's not. What the fuck?
Contrast for me a human who has an incredibly
We're both
active
stupid.
default mode network versus someone who's more quiescent and not too active.
That sucks.
What might we see in those two individuals?
We haven't had a rally up.
It's
That's
a hard
not
question
smart.
to answer because a lot of the current kind of conversation around the default mode network is very much painting it as this negative thing, that it's the source of all of our ailments because, you know, when we're mind wandering, we're not as happy as when we're engaged, when we're in the present moment. A lot of mindfulness stuff is about kind of turning down the default mode network and turning it off. And in those moments, like we mentioned earlier, that's what we experience as equanimity, right? And a lot of these kind of spiritual practices are based around kind of dissolving the ego, dissolving the self, which is kind of reflected in these regions kind of being dysregulated. But I kind of approach this from another perspective that there needs to be a balance because the default mode network is also the most powerful tool that we have as individuals to actually create the world that we want.
I was literally
it's
thinking
what we
that.
use to engage
creativity.
in our self-creation and who we are and who we can be, to actively reflect. But it's how it's being used that's the
you
main
son of a bitch.
question. Because it also is something that when I'm depressed and I have this version of myself that I'm a worthless person and nothing is ever going to work right and I'm never going to achieve anything, that becomes the model that I'm now ruminating on. And the default mode activity in that moment is more about reaffirming how worthless I am, right? Whereas if I kind of harness the power of it, I can use it for kind of positive, flexible models of myself.
So is there kind of a positive feedback thing
Yeah, we
going
tried
on
hard.
with the default mode network? If you're depressed and telling those stories, it feeds on itself. And if you're motivated and have a positive view of your identity, that feeds on itself.
I think so. The way that I think about a lot of these things is kind of couched in what's called kind of control theory or cybernetics. I view a lot of this as feedback loops, that essentially we're creating a model of what we think we are, what we think we value, and where we're going. And that model then becomes something that is now, it's like a thermostat, right? A thermostat, you can set it to a certain temperature, that's the set point, and then when it goes off of that set point, you get error signals, and you're like, hey, we're not there, so we need to readjust our behavior. When you really look at what a lot of these models are capable of doing in terms of directing your attention, especially reflexive attention, right? So a lot of people, when they talk about attention, they're talking about kind of control, like directing the spotlight of attention. But if I define myself, let's just say, like, silly example, if I say I'm a Jeep person, and that's like my whole identity is about souping up my Jeep and making it the best Jeep ever, all of a sudden I'm gonna see Jeeps everywhere. This happened to my brother. He just like started driving Jeeps. He's like, I see them everywhere, and there's not more Jeeps around. It's now you are tuned into those things. You're training your attention to reflexively capture those things.
And once that happens, how difficult is it for the Jeep identity to change to an electric bike identity?
Yeah, I think that it requires a lot of scaffolding, right? I think there's two ways to get there in a lot of these kind of situations, and one of them is very effortful. It's the active process of like, you know what, I saw something, I'm reflecting on it. Am I really, like, is driving a Jeep really the best thing? You know, I saw a documentary about the state of the world, and now, you know, that's making me question what I'm doing, and I'm engaging in this forward thought process and really changing my model. And
I wonder, should
but
I
the
get
other
the
side of
battle
it too
pass?
is, because that's so effortful, oftentimes we can also turn to these groups that are part of our identity. That, like, these are people that I respect. These are people that that
These
kind of
seem
give me a
busted.
sense of what I think should be important. And so if you're surrounded by people that are kind of pushing the whole, like, hey, why are you still driving a Jeep when there's electric cars around? That pressure itself can cause the model to shift as well.
Or the other way, right? They could reject it because
Yeah.
it's a threat to their identity.
Absolutely.
And what's the distinction there? How does one time reject and the other time it confirms and moves to something else?
I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with where this thing lies on your value list, right? I mean, how often do you actually do an inventory?
Okay. Well, we're gonna wrap up here. I have much to think about with regard to the battle pass. I don't know if I should get it or not, because I kind of do want to get it. But then I would definitely have to play the next 15 days. Which is a bit of time to commit. I wish they would tell you what events are coming up, so then I would, like, know if I'm gonna be doing events or not. That would be cool. Here, I guess fuck it. Let's go ahead and get it. We'll get some free gold. I haven't got one in forever. You get 950 back? Well, how much does it cost? You only get 50 gold? That's a gamble. That's a gamble right there. I gotta finish it if I do it. Oh jeez. Alright, we're gambling. I'm gonna try to finish it. If I don't finish it, I'm going to be a sad, sad man. What's this guy? MG2? Top 1? You're crazy. Destroy an aircraft. That's also gambling, so we'll re-roll that. Top 20 twice! Damn it! I should have just left it be. Well, we'll try re-rolling tomorrow. Tomorrow should be easy to wrap up. We'll just do 3 battles, I guess, and hopefully at least get 6 things done. That's how many I'll have to do every day. At least 6 in the 15 days. Maybe some more, maybe some less. Yeah. It's not super worth it, but we'll try, I guess. 50 stinking gold is really not a huge sum.